Now, what I would like to do is to next time I talk to Halsey, because he does his own podcast, I'd like to get Tom onto a podcast. But remember, Halsey has a following, and to get Tom on, we need to have some people. And I would like Tom to explain outside of the Halsey audience, basically, what are the British involvements in the Iran nuclear program, which, as I have basically postulated for a while, I think is overblown to more than what it really is. And that we have seen clearly that Russia is not willing to participate on the nuclear side of Iran's architecture.
Yeah.
So,
Anyway,
and
before
one
we
of the
continue, to the audience, I'm David Marks, the Spy Guy. This is my sometimes collaborator, David S., and we're talking about stuff going on in the Middle East. So just so you can get caught up. When he talks about the British, he means not what we think of the British or the United Kingdom. He's talking about the City of London banking infrastructure for the most part, and the Five Eyes intelligence system.
well, that's it. I actually, believe that the Five Eyes structure and the history of going all the way predating Mackinder, going actually to the first Crimean War and predating that, maybe even as far back as the East India Company. Just 1 second. All right. Okay. This is all right.
And he's frozen.
Okay. Now I don't see you. Now I'm
Yeah, you don't see me,
offline.
but I can hear you.
Okay. So do we want to reboot here or?
No. Just continue.
Oh, okay. How do I get back on?
You are on. You just turned off your camera.
So how do I turn my? Oh, maybe it's back on now. There we go.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, I got a message. Yeah, I got a message. Believe it or not,
Mm.
from something that I had to look at. But I'll not do that. I have to get used to this. But here's the whole thing. A lot of people, whether it's Richard Poe, who I think is brilliant, I want to re-listen to some of the stuff he has to say, and Alex Trainer when he's not completely influenced by all the Israel haters. They all come up with the same idea that you have this inherent struggle between the British system and the American financial system. And I would say we could even go when we say Crimean War. I want to run this past you and get your opinion. I think that the Crimean War is directly related to the United States Civil War. Why? Because when the Crimean War finished, grain glutted the market in Europe from Ukraine and basically collapsed what was really propping Europe up. So, in response to that, Britain started leaning on the U.S., and then Abraham Lincoln had to invoke the Morel tariffs. So, you can see how the collapse of the Crimean War actually carries all the way over to the Civil War. And a lot of that is the same problem that we are seeing today. Um, Again, we talk about grain. We talk about BlackRock. We talk about various different instruments in Ukraine, and some of it is to weaken Russia. But grain is important from Ukraine, and other resources are important. And you have Mr. BlackRock himself has been showing up at meetings recently. Larry Fink has apparently, according to, and again, you can't believe 70% of what's on social media, but we have seen that Larry Fink has attended via video connect some of the talks taking place between, I believe, Kirill Dmitrov, Witkoff, and Kushner. So, I mean, we're kind of seeing again an Eastern European resource situation, a failing economy in the European Union, and a huge debt in the United States. And I'm not going to say that that's parallel to the first Crimean War, but as Mark Twain would always say, history never repeats, but it often rhymes. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, it does. I'm really not really looked into the grain situation, though it does make a lot of sense to me. in those historical parallels. I remember reading an excellent book on the Crimean War, and it started off kind of like this ultimate mission creep, Afghanistan style, where the original idea is we just don't want the Russians taking out Turkey to maintain the concert of Europe, and then it expanding into a land war to take out Sevastopol for a number of years and reduce Russian fleet influence there. And yeah, so was more my looking at it from the geomilitary strategic view. Getting involved more in this financial stuff is fascinating, but I haven't gotten into
That's where I think Tom is such an expertise. And I've noticed that none of I get this information from a guy who's actually, he's not talking to me right now because he is a BB fanatic on the Reconquista. And I've turned completely against the current structure in Israel. I'm looking for a new structure. But he's a student of history. He helped to invent one of the genomes. And he says, if you're going to look at what's going on in Ukraine, if you're going to look at what's going on with Russia, if you're going to look at the economic situation in the United States, you must go back to the original Crimean War. You must look at the American South as having suffered under the Morel tariffs because basically too much grain from Ukraine, it basically completely gutted and depressed the market in Europe. I mean, it almost has like shades of the whole tulip thing in the Netherlands. Yeah. And so, by doing that, basically the South had no choice but to succeed. Now, that's not true. All the South had to do was sit in their seats and not move, and they could have paralyzed Lincoln, who didn't even want the Civil War in the beginning. Right. I mean, one of the main arguments made for the Civil War was fights over territories in Missouri and those areas. But in terms of what we're seeing right now, and that's what I would like to, by the way, quiz a couple of people on is query, is how can we look again at the first Crimean War, subsequently the Morel tariffs, and see, do we have a situation like that going on today? Because in terms of Tom, everything is financial. Or it's different. But are we on that kind of a parallel path? And you would have to admit, as a military person, the Civil War was pretty intense and pretty ugly.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's the first real industrial warfare.
Well, yes,
Crimean
yes,
War
very,
had
very.
a little bit of that, where if the British had stormed Sevastopol, they could have done it. But the commander Raglan and some of the other commanders were freaking out because what happened is, like, it's one thing to understand that your rifle can hit a target 800 yards away. It was the first battle where they actually used massed rifle fire, and the Russians were armed with muskets that could only hit 200 feet with accuracy. So the British and French invasion force went insane when they realized they could pluck off the Russians from, like, I can kill a Russian and they can't kill me. And their army went berserk. And so that's one of the reasons why they didn't storm in, because they figured the army would just slaughter everyone in Sevastopol.
Well, it's interesting, though, that by the time the Civil War hit the U.S., even though it's pretty much played down today, although Matt Ehret over at Canadian Patriot has done a lot of work to counter that. But his view and other views is that Russia did play a pivotal role in helping the Union with the Civil War. Yep. So I don't think it was because of their muskets. I'm not quite sure what they did, but they did something.
Yeah, they did. They were also working against British interests because, the Great Game. So they kept the British tied up, thinking what would Russia do if we got involved, say, with the South? I mean, the French, of course, decided to try and conquer Mexico, which didn't work out well for them.
Well, I mean, aren't we seeing shades of a possible similarity here? Because you have the neocons. Now, for me, the neocons, I mean, there's always been an argument, are the neocons a product of Leo Strauss in Chicago and the Holocaust? or are neocons an extension of British foreign policy? And I would say the primacy of Tony Blair
Mm,
during the Bush years leads me to think that the neocons are an American extension of general British foreign policy towards Eurasia. Now, if that be the case, we see Dimitrov with um, Kushner and with Witkoff, who are Trump's emissaries. And yes, Trump needs emissaries. He doesn't need professionals at the State Department that are going to work against him. That's
mm,
when I try to tell spaces in the Jewish world, oh, but they're not professionals. No, they're not doing what you want. They're not
right,
doing a neocon policy, but they're doing what Trump wants.
right.
And Trump is actually trying to be, as goofy as he may seem, he's trying to be president. He is trying to initiate a Trump doctrine, and he is trying to stop the runaway debt in the United States. Now, I know Douglas McGregor may not like that, but
Mm,
I think Doug Casey understands that. Anybody that knows what Trump was put there to do is they know he's a demolition specialist in New York, and he
mm,
is there to try to restrain and demolish the debt. So everyone, oh, his tariffs are crazy. The guy is nuts. No, there is method to his tariffs. The way
mm,
he's handling the tariffs is the way he would negotiate with tough guys in New York to get their properties and then compromise. That's how real estate moguls act.
yeah.
You have to
Most
see
of these
that
people
both
have never
Witkoff.
sold a house before. I have.
Well, yeah, when you're dealing with Witkoff, when you're dealing with Kushner, when you're dealing with Barrett, these are all real estate guys. They've probably demolished each other at
Mm,
different periods of times.
mm,
So they know exactly how high stakes finance works in New York. And
mm,
that for me makes them quite qualified to deal in the international world because I think that's what is needed at the moment. But think of all four of them are hard nosed real estate people that deal with every single person in the Middle East and who's important, and they know how to deal with them. And I
mm.
don't think that most of the general public really appreciates why they are relevant to what they're doing. You hear these snide remarks, oh, they're just real estate guys that got a loan from Qatar. I mean, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, no, these are guys that negotiate. They've all been through bankruptcies. They've all had their triumphs, and they all need to get good deals out of the Gulf, period.
Yeah.
So those are the guys I want to see representing the U.S.
Yeah. No. These State Department guys. I don't know who's running them. I guess neocon is really what's running it. But I remember the Arabist school, and they were very anti-Israel. That's why people like Canada say,
Oh,
"Oh,
it's terrible.
I'm like, guys, you don't understand American history. You think that everything's you take the Zionist position alliance that only starts in the late 70s, early 80s with Israel, and you just pull it back throughout time, and it's like you have no idea what the wasps used to prevent Jews from attending Harvard. They had lists of prescriptions like they do against the Asians now. Like,
Oh, you had country clubs in Palm Springs, country clubs in
mm,
Long Island. The Jews couldn't get into it. It was terrible at the time. And what had ended up happening, of course, one of the most controversial people, but he's Jewish himself, has written on that actually in favor of the WASP. And of course, you know who I'm talking about. It's Ron Unz.
mm,
And he's actually delved into that probably more than most people, not very favorably towards people like me, but he's been very, very meticulous in documenting this whole period of Harvard University and Yale, the country clubs. It was a real issue. Now,
mm,
in terms of what we would call an Arabist foreign policy, well, I studied with Willard Beeling from Aramco as my minor. I was always interested in Middle East and international relations. And as he always said, the quest for an American policy. Well, the truth of the matter is, we have not had, the last time we had an American policy, even if I didn't agree with it,
mm.
was Henry Kissinger.
Yeah.
Uh, Tillerson wasn't around long enough as an oil man to make an American policy. And I don't believe that George Shultz under Reagan was given the tools to really make an American foreign policy in the Middle East. And so what I see Trump trying to do right now in the Middle East, and this is not harmful to Israel, and it's harmful to Israeli ego and
Yeah.
American Jewish ego and it makes a few bruises.
Mm.
But what is really happening here is that for the first time since Henry Kissinger, Trump is trying to make a truly American foreign policy
Mm.
in the region, understanding that part of that policy is retreat, coming back and focusing more on our Western hemisphere
Right.
and trying to, as Ambassador David Friedman said earlier, outsource to the Emirates, outsource to the Israelis. I'm in an extreme minority when it comes to Israel. I'm as pro-Israel as anybody, but I'm an integrationalist. I always have been, based on my travels and life experience.
Mm.
Uh, I think that if you can find a way to marry Israel to the Gulf states, especially the Emirates, with Saudi Arabia, Qatar is on doing a different thing. I mean, they cooperate, but they're not really part of that. But if you have the Emirates and Israel can find a way to balance between the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, which are starting to have their own rivalries, you
Yep.
could start to see the beginning of a kind of, let's say, what would the British call it, where basically they outsource their policy and let the local region become its own power, but still have a certain amount of deference to Washington, which goes against London.
Yeah.
And that's what I think, even if Trump cannot say it and enunciate it in those words,
Mhm.
I think that that is the trajectory that all these guys are trying to go in.
Mhm.
And I think that's good for the U.S.
Yeah. It is. It is good for everyone, except for our City of London neocon friends.
Well, now this is where it gets interesting again. Okay, we have two or almost octogenarians that, in my opinion, their timestamp, and of course their supporters are going to hate to hear this, but their timestamp has kind of come due. One is Bibi, who did marvelous things for Israel. Most importantly, he brought a market economy. He stopped with the basket case. He brought Stanley Fischer um, from the New York Fed in. Um, he whipped the country into shape, married it to Wall Street, got all the intelligence to do one exit after the next.
Mhm.
And he took Israel from being a basket case into being a real powerhouse.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, he came from that era of the whole Iran neocon thing, and he's just not able to move forward. He was doing very well, great relations with Russia, great relations with China. But the last 8, 9 years, starting with the trials and just being there too long. I mean, there's always a question with a dynasty. A lot of these kings and queens we've seen, like, for example, King Salman, I think it is right now in Saudi Arabia. I have no right to speak about their king. I don't know enough about it. But a lot of older statesmen end up simply being figureheads. But
Right.
that's not the case in Israel. Bibi is still running the show, and he hasn't transitioned into being a senior advisor because he's not been allowed to.
Yeah.
Same thing in Turkey. Erdogan should have left 3, 4 years ago, uh, but nobody can find anybody to replace him, and he's too paranoid.
Yeah.
But once you get into your mid 80s, if you want to be at the top of the pyramid, you really have to gracefully become a senior advisor, I think. I mean,
Mm.
tell me one leader that was really running the show well when they got into their 80s or 90s.
Mhm.
Maybe they exist, but I don't know who.
Yeah. Technically
So
Trump right now, but he's not doing as well as he should be doing because he's got himself put into to an echo chamber. Unfortunately, I have some
very
friends.
true. But what has Trump done? What has Trump done that neither Erdogan nor Bibi have been able to do?
Get,
He probably does know his limitations, although his ego is certainly bigger than anybody in the world, and I love it.
mm,
Um, he has good advisors running the show. Rubio is actually running the show. Witkoff is running the show. Barrack is running the show. Trump is excellent at delegating. So if you go to see a press conference with Trump, he's done something that I haven't seen in years. His whole cabinet sits equally with him at the press conference. Have you
right.
noticed that? Well, whether you like him or you don't like him, Vance is next to him. Rubio is next to him. Bessent is there. All these people are sitting at every conference he has right next to him. And for me, the perception of that is a sign of delegation.
Mm,
And that is what um, I believe makes for an elder statesman.
Mm.
And so, even though he wants to take credit for everything and nobody's ever seen anything like this before, he is delegating and he's delegating publicly.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing. I haven't seen anybody pick that up. Look at Tulsi Gabbard. She spoke out very forcefully yesterday or the day before
Mhm.
against the British interests and the British thing. And a lot of people have poo-pooed on Tulsi. I think Tulsi is terrific. I think Tulsi
She's
should be
running.
in a higher
I
position.
watched her speech at Turning Point USA. I'm like, this is a
Yeah.
campaign opening speech. Like, this is what you do when you're announcing your candidacy. Like, so she's running for 28, no matter
I
what J.D.
think
Vance does.
Trump. I think Trump has a good
Mm.
feel for Tulsi Gabbard,
Mm.
and I know, unfortunately, in the Jewish world, a lot of people don't like her because her, just like myself, was interested in Syria, did not approve of the Project for a New American Century, did not approve of Bush, did not approve of Obama. But that doesn't mean that she's not pro-American, and that doesn't mean in any way that she's anti-Israel.
Oh,
But
she's actually
I
very
don't see
anti-Muslim. She is
what
very anti-Muslim or Islamist,
I
I should
just
say.
don't see really how the Project for a New American Century really benefited Israel. I mean, it created so much chaos and extra unnecessary wars. I think the PNAC, starting even before the PNAC, with the second invasion of Iraq that Alex Craner claims the main reason for that was the financial crisis. Um, I just don't see how that benefited anybody except for people in the City of London and some people in Wall Street. It set the Middle East backwards by at least 30 years. I don't see where the benefit came from that, but maybe you have a different perspective.
No,
What
no,
what benefit?
I can say I don't think it was for Israel's benefit much either. It was for, like you said, certain financial interests that would get the money, but not necessarily Israel's best interest to have every country blow up around them.
Well, there is a school of thought that exists because there is a very heavy neocon influence, just as there's a neocon influence in Poland. I mean, if you think you have a neocon influence in Israel, it pales to a neocon influence in Poland. Now, that neocon influence doesn't exist when it comes to Hungary,
Mm.
interestingly enough. But I mean, could we say to a degree that Poland has been very shaped by neocons? And only recently are there even some whispers, well, that might not be the right thing to be on.
Yeah. No. No, I think you're right about those situations. Just the Middle East. We were talking. You were talking earlier that Israel is trying to convince the Americans to bomb the ICBM's program, and it's like I'm not too sure that's a good
I'm
idea.
against it. I'm the lone dissenter. But then again, I think Israel had such a marvelous opportunity with Syria in this last year,
Mm.
and the government is stuck with the albatross, for lack of a better expression, of October 7th. And a way that I know that Bibi, if he didn't have this albatross around his neck, and not the cabinet where he had to choose a cabinet in order to make a coalition, rather than choosing a cabinet to boost his ideas, would have jumped on Syria when the opportunity came. And that's been squandered. But it's been squandered because, again, there's an albatross. It's called October 7th. Now, the problem with Bibi is that all those years being at the United Nations and all that, in Iran and the bomb in Iran and this and Iran and that. Well, interestingly, I do not like Democrats, and I certainly don't like Obamacrats very much.
Mm.
But Rahm Emanuel was on in the last couple of days, and Rahm Emanuel is somebody that hates Trump. I love Trump.
Mm.
Um, he despises Bibi. I don't despise Bibi. I do think he should retire
Mm.
or be in a new construct where he's a senior statesman.
Mm.
But I'm very much against the current government. But he brought up some interesting points. He's saying what Bibi is doing by being stuck in this Captain Ahab, for lack of it, that's by my expression, by the way,
Mm.
being in this Captain Ahab situation. Iran is collapsing on its own. I mean, we have seen in Iran in the last year Um, and I'm going to relate this now in a minute to South America. We've seen in the last year the women aren't wearing veils anymore,
Hmm.
the ones that don't want to. The discos all of a sudden are propping up everywhere, and the government isn't doing anything. And you've got almost rave parties in the streets.
Mm.
Well, that's a sign that the old government is starting to implode. If they're not even trying to control it anymore,
Mm.
let Iran implode from within. Why is it necessary to bomb, 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 bomb when you know that Tel Aviv is going to get hit with tons and tons of missiles again? And that is the reason I call it the Captain Ahab effect.
Mm.
What Israel should be doing is what they do best. Their best is intelligence. Their best is working with all the different groups in Iran, both the liberals and the Azeris and the Khuzestani Arabs, and let the system implode and then rebuild itself from within.
Mm.
And if Rahm Emanuel is saying that, and he's diametrically opposed to my general views, I think that taking the risk of having another huge, huge assault and then running the risk, it may not happen,
Mm.
but Israel took a big hit the last time.
Yeah.
It could take a bigger hit this time. And there's no guarantees that it won't.
Not to mention that Iran has reached out to Russia and China to rearm because they were trying to kind of go it alone and then realized that they needed those S-300s after all, and the Russians have been providing them. No, I don't know how.
Russia will not go against Israel. You
No,
cannot
that's
take
a defensive. This is a defensive capability. I'm not talking about offensive.
well defensive,
Maybe
yes, but you have to
early.
remember that again. There is this in the Jewish world. There's this hatred for Russia, which is again a neocon concept from the age of the Palest settlement and all those horrible pogroms that took place
Yep.
during the time of the Tsar, and also a lot of crap that happened uh, during the Stalin years.
Oh yeah.
And then, but leaving that alone for a minute, you had almost 2 million Russians and Russian-speaking Jews in Israel. Now, why do I say 2 million Russian and Russian-speaking Jews? Is that you have a certain amount of those Russian speakers that consider themselves now to be Ukrainian. Okay, fine, whatever you like. And for Russia, it is a matter of prestige to have a Russian-speaking country that is not in Brighton Beach or Coney Island.
Yeah.
So Putin never stops talking about in all his speeches when all these guys that we know from all the different podcasts, which are all basically hate Israel podcasts, tried to say Russia this, Russia that. For example, Larry Johnson, and Putin would simply respond, "Look, Israel is a Russian-speaking country." Now you don't have to pay attention when he says that,
Yep.
but he's the man in charge, and if he says it's a Russian-speaking country, he's sending a message out. We are not going to let, even though Hamas visited us and we got our hostages out, we are not going to go with the kind of extremism that we fought
Mm.
in Russia in the 90s against a Russian speaking country.
Mm.
Never mind all the church properties, which we won't talk about,
Mm.
in Israel. And that's why Bibi finally said the other day, I am speaking to Putin regularly. And I'm glad he finally did that. Now, he
Mm.
was so weak for a while that he wasn't allowed to visit Russia. And so you had all these people coming in from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and going to visit Ukraine and Zelensky and Zelensky and all these. And I'm saying, do you realize what you're supporting? I mean, if you even have a sense of history, you're
Supporting
supporting the people
low.
that caused Baba Yar.
Yeah.
But it's politics make strange bedfellows, and it's impossible. It's one of those subjects where when you have a heat, especially on social media, it's very hard to really have intelligent discussions.
Mm.
So I'm not at all worried about Russia taking the side of Iran, no matter what Bibi does. And remember, as much as I would prefer to see somebody other than Bibi, personally, Bibi does have a special relationship with Vladimir Putin that goes back now to 2003.
Mm.
And to pretend that that relationship doesn't exist, well, you can do that. I mean, Alexander Dugin can do that, but it has nothing to do with reality.
Yeah. Well, it is
So,
interesting. Well, I just said like it's a defensive weapons contract. That's also Venezuela. People keep wondering what is the Russian angle in Venezuela, and I'm like, I did an article about 10 years ago when Chavez was still alive, and they have $10 billion worth of weapons contracts with Russia, and that's hard currency. The Russians aren't going to let walk away. They know as
Well,
soon as
here's the problem with Hugo Chavez. Okay, and I did very well in Venezuela. I was from that generation that really disliked the Bush years.
Mhm.
But let's go back to when Chavez was elected. First of all, he got elected because both Carlos Andres Perez and especially Caldera ignored the poor people and let the ranchos, favelas, we say ranchos in Venezuela, get so big with no infrastructure. And it just became a complete kleptocracy like Russia was starting to become in the 90s. So Chavez comes in, and yeah, he put some hospitals and schools in the ranchos, but he didn't start out by expropriating properties. His first trip was to the United States. And when he got to the United Nations, he quoted Walt Whitman and expressed his love for the U.S.
Mhm.
He then, from there, went on private meetings, very pro U.S. He ended exchange controls, which you would never have expected him to do
Mhm.
at the request of the U.S. And he was willing to cooperate with the U.S. almost fully. But here's the problem that the U.S. has again and again and again, and I think other empires and the British before have this, probably the French, is you had a very disgruntled elite class in Venezuela that felt they were no longer running the show.
Yep.
And they would do anything, and they thought, we can get this guy out in a hurry and come back in. Well, they somehow forgot about the Cuban Revolution, that the United States put Castro into power in the first place because Batista was demanding some proceeds from the sugar production, and the Dulles family couldn't quite understand why Batista thought that he had any right to any of the proceeds more than what they were willing to give. And the Cuban thing, well, what boosted the Venezuelan lobby was not the Venezuelan by a lobby by itself, but the fact that Letinan and uh, I forget the names of some of the other people in the Cuban lobby, including the senator from New Jersey, Melendez, and all that.
Mhm.
Uh, Here comes Venezuela, which is far richer than the Cuban lobby. Cuban lobby, of course, is rich because they're in Miami and practically own half of Miami.
Yep.
But Venezuela is far, far bigger. So once you married, and this is the problem you have in Canada, by the way, with the Ukrainian lobby and the Rada, is because the Ukrainians that came after World War II did so well in real estate that just like many minorities, they have an oversized say in the power of the country because of their financial success. Well, once the Cubans were able to marry the Venezuelan lobby uh, of expats, that their only interest, same as Ahmed al Chalabi
Mhm.
in Iraq, is to basically take back everything they felt was taken from them and have revenge and plunder. Well,
Mhm.
if I was from that elite, I would want to do the same thing. I want my stuff back. And
Mhm.
not only do I want my stuff back, but I want more for having suffered from losing it. That's
Yep.
okay. But when you take the Venezuelan and Cuban lobby, and you know how powerful they are, they always talk about APAC. APAC doesn't hold a candle to the Venezuelan Cuban lobby. Probably Michael Yon wouldn't agree, but that really is the case. You end up with a perverted American foreign policy. The same with the Iranian monarchists in Los Angeles.
Mhm.
Are you going to have an American foreign policy, or are you going to have a bunch of Republican supporting and sometimes Democratic supporting lobbyists that funnel tons of money and influence into running American foreign policy? And that is the real problem with Venezuela.
Mhm.
We don't have a policy. We have a Cuban Venezuelan lobby policy.
Yeah.
I don't know how anyone could say that that's an American foreign policy.
Yeah. I see your point on that.
And we're seeing the same thing with Ukraine, where Ukraine is even more perverse
Oh yeah.
because in the case of Ukraine, you have the local foreign policy, and at the same time, you have the neocons, and let's cut Russia down to size once and for all, and that means, of course, the British. Now, the British are not in Venezuela, but guess who is in Venezuela? The Canadians. Why? Because as big as the oil business is
Mhm.
in Venezuela, the richest mines of all are the gold mines in the Orinoco regions and down by Ciudad Bolivar and in that area. And if you track the Canadian gold mining companies, let's say we go to Peru,
Yep.
you're talking about the most predatory controlling companies of all these different mineral groups.
Yep. I
So
know.
do you see the
I'm
parallel?
aware of Barrick Gold and all the other mining companies around here.
Look,
People would,
gold
people
is a
love investment.
I mean, gold is a tough market.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I suspect that one of the reasons why the Sendero Luminoso was there as long as it was, with all the instability in Peru for a while, goes back to the financials and the mining companies of the 80s
Mhm.
and 90s. And to this day, you have no stability in Peruvian politics.
Mhm.
I mean, you're having, basically one government overthrown. There's only been two good leaders in the last 40 years, Fujimori and Pedro Kaczynski. The rest have all been terrible. Uh, but again, to think that mining doesn't enter into the picture, it certainly does. Fujimori's biggest sin was that he reached out to Japan and started getting, because remember, he spoke fluent Japanese, and
Mhm.
he reached out to Japan and he started to get different streams of revenue, which I suspect made Peru a little bit less dependent. They're still dependent, but less dependent on commodity extraction. Now you have Millet, who is doing just the opposite. He is basically tearing apart Argentina and turning it back into commodity extraction. Well, apparently Millet may be an okay economist, but he's not very patriotic in that respect. He
Mhm.
believes that, well, we have on paper this marvelous carry trade economy, but it all is basically um, become a commodity extraction situation. So you see tremendous loss of jobs and less people in restaurants, and prices for dinners here starting to approach stateside level, more expensive than Spain. And that's again because of this whole neoliberal, commodity extraction type situation, and then tripling and quadrupling the money supply. So it's you're seeing patterns of that. Argentina, I believe, will be okay because the U.S. has deemed Argentina as a strategic country, just as it deems Israel and Poland, Japan and South Korea as strategic countries. So that probably will pull it through. So you see now, coming back to Venezuela, that Maduro, this is where again I object to these lobbies. Maduro has told the United States repeatedly, and I was in Peru when Chavez passed away and he came in repeatedly. We want to work with the United States. You can take control of 80, 90% of what we have.
Right.
And Melendez and all these people and Rubio, no, 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 no. And so you're putting the interests of an elite in front of, if I may be so bold as to say, a Monroe Doctrine based American foreign policy.
Right. Well, they don't have the firepower to take out Venezuela. What they do seem to have is the firepower to do a naval blockade, which is what they've imposed. So we'll see how
But
long
they're
that.
just creating more misery. I mean, how is this in any manner an American foreign policy? Their real problem is Lula, and they're doing nothing about that.
Why don't you speak about Lula then? Why he's such a big issue, other than all that censorship going on in Brazil.
No, it's terrible. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. Censorship. what they did to Bolsonaro. Anybody that disagrees with the judge is in a dungeon for God knows who long. The courts have been completely co-opted, and the consequence is once you have something that could euphemistically be called a juristocracy.
Yeah.
A juristocracy basically puts the legal profession as one of the main sources of revenue.
Mhm.
Now, try to think what industry produces more revenue for the legal profession than anything else.
Censorship. I don't know.
Cartels.
Oh yes, yes, cartels. Cartels are all about banks and lawyers.
It's all about recycling of capital and money in banks and lawyers.
Yeah.
So, what you're doing is you're basically creating lawlessness. And Brazil is a more important country than Venezuela.
By far.
That's one of the reasons why the United States, I personally believe, is backing Malay and will now back Cast, and he's going to back what's his name in Paraguay, and Bolivia has just come on board. So since Malay was there first and made the most noise, even though I disagree completely with his economic model, I think you're going to see a lot of U.S. support
Mm,
in the Southern Cone.
mm.
And remember that the other reason why you're going to see a lot of U.S. support in the Southern Cone is because of the huge port that was built north of Lima near Chimbote in Peru,
Mm.
which is the largest Chinese port outside of Asia.
Wow.
And so you're going to see, just as you saw with the Panama Canal, you're going to see a lot of competition. So in a way, it's good for Argentina. Argentina has a huge chunk of the Antarctic. They control the Southern Cone. Chile is going to join in, but the problem is it's neoliberalism on steroids, and it also means that the fellows making money mischief here will continue to be able to make money mischief for a long time, and that is not going to necessarily build the country up.
Yeah, it was very
So,
interesting. At the turn of the 20th century, Argentina was actually considered richer than the United States.
well, just walk around Buenos Aires and you can see signs of it.
Mm.
I mean, not the street and the potholes, but if you look at the buildings and you look at the cafes and you look, yes, it. This was the most solid. Only New York would compete with this, and
Mm.
and here actually the buildings, the rich areas were a little bit bigger than they were at the turn of the 20th century in New York. It was absolutely something phenomenal, Buenos Aires, and most of the buildings are still here.
Mm.
Because once in a while the British ran things correctly.
Mm.
The U.S. never learned to write things. We can say what we want about the British. We certainly don't like City of London and their foreign policies, but certainly the British, wherever they went, they did bring some semblance of civilization, and nowhere was that done better than in Argentina.
Okay. Yeah, no, yeah, the Americans are just terrible at empire. It's just, you know, at least
Well,
with
I
the
think they're
British,
terrible. I think they're terrible at empire because but that's not a bad thing.
yeah.
We don't have a tradition of empire.
Oh no,
We have a tradition of being American, and
yeah.
that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing.
Hmm. Yeah. I would like to see my big one of my biggest complaint often about what's going on with the American Empire is just like I'd like competent empire, which is what the British had. I remember there's a British podcaster by the name of Sarg, who was sometimes Sargon of the Cod, and he said, you know,
What's his name?
he sometimes goes by Sargon of Akkad, but now he tends to use his real life name. But uh, he does the podcast about Otis Eaters. But one time he was like asked about like, oh, you want us British ruling the world? Are you going to give us back our empire? No? Then get lost. Like, we'll be happy to do it. You give us back the Royal Navy, you give us back India, you give us back most of Africa. We'll run it for you. But you're not going to do that. So
I believe the British lost their empire to a large degree because of mistakes that Churchill made more than anything else.
yeah, some of it's Churchill, some of it's other people. I think what one of the problems is that Churchill, because he was a writer, and a good speech maker and other stuff. He became the focal point,
A
good or
good
bad.
writer, a good writer, a good speech maker, and an absolute disaster in everything else.
Yeah, but because I feel he gets all the focus for a lot of stuff when other people would have done, like Lord Balfour should be mentioned a lot more, Clement Attlee should be
Sure.
mentioned a lot more, but all we always hear about is Churchill, for good or bad. And it's just like, there's a lot of other
Ernest
guys.
Bevin was another Ernest Bevin was another disaster.
Yeah.
And after that, you see the U.S. did have good diplomats and everything until the end of the Cold War, and then
Yeah.
at the end of the Cold War, they ended up losing everything.
Yeah.
And so, in the English-speaking world today, we don't have competent people.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm glad that Trump is taking such the proactive approach he's taking and saying, there used to be a wonderful program on, I think it was PBS, I don't know, but there was something that used to be called America's Castles.
Yep.
And it showed how we built up our own castles, a lot of them in the Midwest, on the rivers, on the Great Lakes. And I believe right now we're coming back to the original American diplomat. The original American diplomat was what you saw in the 20s and the 30s, and going back even to Teddy Roosevelt's days, where basically, if you want to be ambassador to the court of St. James or to Paris, whatever, you have a few qualifications. Number one, you have to have enough money to keep up the embassy and give parties. Number two, you have to show that you have a substantial relations, not just with the blue blood in the United States, but you have substantial business dealings in those countries, and that you know everybody that's important, and that you're going to further business with the United States. That's who got to be ambassador in the old days.
Yeah.
Not technocrats.
Yeah.
And so you have all these people pining for so-called technocrats that have ruined the United States around the world. But when I look at Witkoff, I look at Barrack, I look at Kushner, I actually see a return to the qualifications that used to be an American diplomat. The only difference is that in the former days, they all went to Ivy League schools and had better pedigree at the social clubs, which I also like. And these guys don't. But that basically, in terms of essence, they are doing with what used to be American foreign policy, and it worked very well. Now, what would be better is if you could pair that with intellectuals like Keenan, Jack Matlock, and some of those others, and if you could pair them, and that is lacking completely now.
Yeah.
But that is really what made the U.S. grow up.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to see we're at the beginning, or even maybe the early middle stage of the end of the technocracy, with all the new technologies that have come along that really diffuse and weaken their power. And I think when the boomers shuffle off their mortal coil, they're the last groups that are still believing in their capability. Gen X, millennials, Zoomers, they all have no use for the big institutions that really bound the post-World War II consensus together. And they're just going to, they're smaller, faster, more nimbler than these guys. And it kind of reminds me, it's starting to look a lot like the end of the Soviet Union around here with all our leadership class.
Well, yes and no, because I'm very pleased with Trump's foreign policy. Maybe in Canada it's different. But certainly in Europe is the worst of the worst. I mean, the level of incompetency in what became the European Union, which, I mean, the genesis of the European Union was actually in two guys bring this up, Tom Woods and also, what's her name, Sherrar, the Jewish woman that was anti the back stuff, was the technocracy that actually started in National Socialist Germany.
Mm-hmm.
The basis from that was in Columbia University, where you had technocracy on one side, but then you had this whole vaccination thing on the other. Well, it took a pause towards the end of World War II and just simply resumed 3, 4 years later with the same people exactly. And the idea is that you create this post nationalist union. Well, just a minute, everyone. Um, what makes the world great were the French were the French, the Germans were the Germans. We don't go to eat European food. We go to eat French food. We go to see French culture. We go to French musical life. Same with German. Same with Italian. And now you want just a bland Eurovision. The worst thing about Eurovision,
Mhm.
in my view, is that Eurovision is the opposite of that. It's that's basically a blob which represents nothing.
Hmm.
And I think in Europe, people aren't quite ready for that. They thought they were. There was a generation that tried it. And people are finally saying, that's nice, but you guys have gone too far.
Yeah.
Now we need to come back to some of our traditions. And
And
so
we're
you
being
may be
joined
right.
by Wasserman.
Hello,
Mhm.
Wasserman. We've been talking about some interesting things here.
Excellent. Well, let me get up to
I don't
speed
know. I
here.
don't know where Michael is. We can't seem to get him on, but
Well, he says
he'll
it's
come
3
out of the.
o'clock where he is, so he was unsure if he would be able to come.
Well, 3 o'clock. Is he in Europe? Where is he?
Yeah, I believe he's in Europe.
He's still in Poland.
Oh, he's still in Poland. Is he getting paid by somebody there? I mean, does he have a job?
Oh, I guess he must have got a call. He gets dropped out.
Yeah, he'll be back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to get on one of these things, Money Circus on.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
That's one reason why we're trying to go earlier, around 8, because then it'd be easier for him to come in from, what is it, Georgia?
I'm not sure what I did there, but
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I mean, I'm not willing to do one with Tom until I write the notes first and clear the notes through you and him, and then build on some of the stuff with Halsey English. And I think for Tom, it has to be done a little bit differently. We need to basically make some agreed upon notes
Yeah.
and talk specifically about the financial aspects of City of London and how that relates, incorporating a little bit of Richard Poe and a little bit of Craner without all the crazy stuff. And I
Yeah.
think we could have an interesting situation going on. And that's what he enjoys, by the way.
Hmm. He says
So
he'll
listen
do
to the
any show
latest
once.
one.
So I've been mainly focusing on building content for the channel for when that happens. So,
He goes on small channels. He will do it.
oh, yeah.
As long as he finds the people interesting.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he's not only looking for large audiences, he's making enough revenue from his both the writing he does for people and for Newsmax, plus the channel, which now has what over 20,000 people, that he wants to enjoy the shows that he gets on. And his enjoyment is basically how do you demolish this City of London neocon structure and try to make a more balanced financial situation.
Mhm.
So what we were talking about, Wasserman, was we've covered a few things. I spoke in the beginning about the need for Bibi and Erdogan to become elder statesmen and just give advice and no longer run things because they have no control over their cabinets. They can't control anything. We spoke a little bit about um, Dimitrov being in Miami with Witkoff and Kushner,
Right back. I'm going to
and
get.
why I believe that these people are really making decisions the old-fashioned way, not the technocratic boob way that's done in today's State Department or as it's done in Europe, but real stakeholders trying to make decisions. We spoke a little bit about this folly in Venezuela and what's happening in South America and why the U.S. has a foreign policy that's completely captive to some, Venezuela Cuban lobbyists, and which is completely counter to anything that Theodore Roosevelt would ever have allowed. And the most interesting thing we spoke about in the beginning, for me, that is, was relating the current Crimea War to, which is what we have right now in Ukraine, with the period of the first Crimean War, the complete collapse of grain prices at the end of the first Crimean War, when all the grain from the Ukraine area came flooding into Europe, which then caused Europe to blockade um, agricultural products from the U.S. South from coming in, and which in turn led to the Morel tariffs, and from the Morel tariffs led to the Civil War. And are we seeing something similarly on that trajectory again right now? So that's what we've been talking about.
And the last thing we were just talking about before you joined was our speculations about the end of technocracy.
Ah. Well,
Unfortunately, I don't see the end of it. I don't see the end of it right now because the training in the universities is still 100% technocracy driven. Go ahead, Wasserman.
But David, the normies used to uncritically worship the graduates of those universities, and I would say that increasingly those graduates are looked upon with suspicion and, if not outright disdain.
But look, I mean, I remember as a kid traveling through Germany and going to a lot of operas, a lot of concerts, and talking to kids also that were musically oriented. And one of the things I learned was Germany and also France had, I think, a system that really made sense. They would give you a series of tests when you entered high school, and most people would not fight. So you had in Germany the Hauptschule, Schule, for most people, which were to learn trades. And then you had the Gymnasium for those that were up to learning languages and entering the professions.
Yep.
And most people were very satisfied with the system. And that system predates probably going back to the last century in Germany. And I forget what it's called in France, but it was exactly the same system. And there was no stigma to it because those tests were aptitude tests.
Yeah.
And people pretty much knew what they had an aptitude for. And it basically worked. You didn't have this idea of equality and all this nonsense of what's fair and equal opportunity and all sorts of other rubbish. So, it would be nice to have a return to that because it actually works.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm favorably inclined to that. I would like to think about it a little bit, but we can say that it works. But on the other hand, we could also say that it works at some nominal threshold, but it didn't work well enough to prevent those countries from being dramatically outpaced by American innovation for 100 years. So it's a double-edged sword, perhaps.
Well, just a minute. When America had its best innovation, which probably would have started when? Post Teddy Roosevelt and continued in the 80s?
I have very strong opinions about that, actually. It's one of my things that I geek out on. I would say that American innovation had its seeds in the Springfield and Harpers Ferry armories and hit its stride in between. There's a 50-year gap in between what historians recognize as the Industrial Revolution and the Mechanical Age. And so during that 50-year gap is when all of the contractors who were, so the Springfield Armory had a policy of contracting or contract labor, and all those contractors went out into the Northeast New England area and propagated industrial techniques which were developed in Springfield. And the real seeds of the real Industrial Revolution, isn't what happened in Europe with steam engines and workhouses. From a technical point of view, the world, the end of artisanal production and the beginning of true industrial production took seeds in that 50-year period, and so I would say that maybe starting at the end of the Industrial Revolution, but certainly by the beginning of the Mechanical Age, that was when the United States really embarked on its 100-year journey of dominating the world. And it was, I would say, entirely due to this propagation of real industrial techniques that spread out from the Springfield Armory. How's that for?
That would have been about circa when, more or less.
So end of Industrial Revolution is 1870-ish, 1880-ish, and then the Mechanical Age is normally considered to be 1920-ish, 1930-ish. So that 50-year period is right in there, and then from the 20s on, the United States had uncontested dominance in a number of areas of industrial production, from arms to transport to you name it, and you're right, all that's solidified in the war. What with the War Production Board, the industrial production techniques, hit their second stride or their new wind and really took off, and so in between 1945 and 1980, Japan played a huge role in that post-war, obviously. But so I'd say up until 1945 it was a purely American enterprise, and then once Deming went over to Japan, it became a joint U.S.-Japanese enterprise, and that's how that's the explanation for the preeminence of the American economy in the world.
Could you explain to me what you mean exactly by the mechanical age?
I'm trying to remember if I'm saying the right word because I'm a little groggy this morning. Let me just make sure I'm using the right term that the historians use. Historical ages, industrial revolution, mechanical age. Or the machine age, that's what they call it. The machine age is considered to be 1880 to 1945, and the machine age is when these industrial techniques had matured, that had come out of the Springfield Armory, and you see it reflected. If you remember, if you think about all those kind of 1920s artistic influences with the speeding steam trains that are all sleek, and that whole 1920s design aesthetic.
I always call that, for since I have more of an artistic background, I always call it the fusion of Art Nouveau and Art Deco. That's what I call that.
Right. Yeah, so that art aesthetic is actually deeply influenced by what was taking place on the economic level, and this juggernaut of American industrialism during the machine age. And it was a juggernaut.
So when you say the industrial age, so the industrial age was more gritty than the machine or mechanical age? I mean, for example, when you have Dickens writing on, Oliver, Tale of Two Cities, all this, the industrial was really the ugliest period.
Well, the industrial revolution was a huge social upheaval, and most of all because it broke the back of the guilds, and brought people into the cities. So it was this dual effect of breaking the back of the guilds and bringing people into the cities.
So Dickens would have been writing when? In the late 1860s? Was that when Dickens was writing?
Yeah. Towards the end of the Industrial Revolution. And it was
So basically what we had was, we had the Holy Roman Empire, which was basically a tax collection just for transporting stuff.
Yep.
And that was replaced by the guilds that go back to the 1600s, like, the famous opera, the Meistersinger von Nuremberg, and all these different guilds, the mini singers and the maxis. What?
The Hanseatic League.
The Hanseatic League. And eventually that stopped being guilds. Guilds went on for like 300-400 years. And then we had this industrial revolution of the development of the city.
Yep.
Does that hark back maybe to Rome?
The guilds became gatekeepers to a point that it became intolerable.
Pardon me?
The guilds overplayed their hand. They became gatekeepers to the point where it was intolerable.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that what modern day unions do in some places?
Well, or modern day technocracy. I think there are lessons to be learned.
Yeah, I mean, history, it's always amazing how it rhymes. Yeah. I mean, again, the reason for the end of the Holy Roman Empire worked fairly well until each castle that was built to rain down arrows if you didn't pay your tax got out of control.
Mhm.
And
The
we see
inevitable
that again, by the way, with private road taxation today and all these other type of taxes that supposedly the European Union was going to fix, but instead they made things 10 times worse. So is this a cycle of history that just keeps repeating itself in a different manner?
I think the inevitable corruption of all human institutions has been recognized going back to the birth of Christianity. That is, in my opinion, at the root of Christ's prohibition on the written word, was to prevent the inevitable corruption of all institutions.
I
So
think that's built into human nature. I don't think there's any
yeah,
way to.
yeah,
Now, that
no, it
doesn't
is.
mean that anybody is born corrupt, but what ends up happening is the moment somebody is under financial pressure or pressure for their family, they will do whatever it takes to maintain their family, their lifestyle,
Absolutely.
those dependent on them.
And this is what's amazing, or this is, in my opinion, the real innovation of the American Constitution was that its writers acknowledged this inevitable corruption as an inevitable force of human nature, and tried to construct a system that mitigated this corruption and tyranny through pitting the powerful against each other. And so in other words, they didn't think they
Now,
could.
stop right there. Stop right there. This is very interesting because we've seen this time and time again, even in our lifetimes. So you're saying the Constitution was established to basically pit the powerful against each other so that nobody would take over. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Well, yeah, I mean I believe that's the core of the foundation. So the core of the founders were, I think, unarguably obsessed with tyranny, and of any sort. And they really searched, they searched, they searched the intellectual space for all forms of tyranny, recognizing tyranny of the masses. They were really exhausted the forms of tyranny and how it can come about. And so they went about erecting a system that, which, although it couldn't eliminate tyranny, would compartmentalize it and mitigate it. And that's what I believe. And so the best way that they found to compartmentalize and mitigate it is these co-equal and separate branches of government that can't really regulate each other. They have no actual power or authority over each other, but they're collections of powerful people who get to work as a check. And so the word check is, we take a lot of things for granted, and we sometimes gloss over these words that have very specific meanings. And the word check might be one of those. It does have a very specific, it doesn't mean control over, it means influence over, or, a mitigating force.
Yeah.
And so my belief is the Constitution is an amazingly, just an amazing intellectual endeavor designed to distribute power to the maximum possible extent while remaining functional, and prevent concentration of tyranny in any one area by pitting the powerful against each other.
I've never thought of that. Have you actually written on that or written that out?
No, I'd be glad to.
No, I mean, it's an interesting concept because we always try to understand exactly what was the practical reasons for the Constitutional Convention, and all these guys were acutely aware of the failings of King George, and so they were probably taking their cue. Because remember, there was no French Revolution yet, and so the Bourbons were still in charge. So, I would think that most of the things they were trying to write, both in the Constitutional Convention and going forward, was how to eliminate as much as possible the worst excesses of these large families in England that were running.
The brilliance was they didn't stop there. They didn't limit themselves to the existing forms of tyranny that were obvious. They actually, I would say, to some extent, foresaw the French Revolution and mitigated against that too.
Interesting. I know. What do you think, David?
Well, they also were tremendously influenced by some of the Italian republics that had lasted, like the Venetian Republic, for 800 years. And we kind of forget about that because we think more modern terms. But these guys had other examples of a republic, and they were very concerned about not making a pure democracy because they also remembered they were all classics literature people, so they knew about the fact that they wanted to avoid the passions of some of the Greek tales, like the one about the one day the city doesn't pay its tribute, so the commons explodes in rage and orders ships to go into the city and destroy the city. And then the next day they're like, oh God, what were we thinking? And they order another ship to countermand that, or to prevent they were concerned, unfortunately, and with well-founded as it seems to be, that the public would learn to vote the treasury.
When you say that, when you say that about the Greeks, I always think it's a very short tale, but it very, very much is apropos to Israel, and that, of course, is the Athenian Melanos conversation, where basically Athenians said, "We are the hegemon." Well, we're a democracy. Well, you're also a yes, but we are the hegemon. You need us. Well, yes, but we are democratic and we're doing okay on our own. Yes, I agree with you, but you really need us for security. And in the end, they just come in and flatten the city to the ground and rebuild it.
Yep.
So that they're part of Athens. And don't we see that again and again and again with the European Union all the time?
Yep. Well, I don't think the European Union has much longer to go. I do believe,
you know what? I wish you were right. I wish you were right. But I believe in inertia. How did the Europeans change their governments in the past? Were through violent conflagrations.
Yeah.
So there may need to be some conflagration
to
put an end to that many-headed cobra. That's
it'll be the that'll do it. I think that when the the chicken comes home to roost or whatever, with Russia swallowing most of Ukraine, that will send shockwaves through their financial markets, like the British have so heavily invested in.
I don't think Russia is going to swallow most of Ukraine. That's not a realistic assessment.
Oh no, they're prepping for it.
I
agree. They probably don't, but they have a plan in place.
They don't pass the Don. There's no way the Russians want to have the.
Oh no, I agree. They don't want to, but they have a plan in place. I was just learning about this the other week, and
I won't argue about that, but I will say that it is. Nothing could be farther from Russian desires. They may well have a plan.
They'd be happy to leave a rump Ukraine. Yeah. I'm just saying they are prepping for if they need to take it all.
No, this was Khrushchev's biggest mistake. Khrushchev gets drunk one night, is singing Ukrainian songs, and creates the monster where there shouldn't have been. He should have understood the Pale Settlement. You don't create a San Andreas fault at your weakest point in the West. It was the stupidest thing. It was probably the stupidest move. You take where you're most vulnerable, which is Europe, and you create this fault in the middle there. It makes no sense. But my question to you is this, Wasserman. I've been thinking about Ukraine, and I've been thinking about the meetings between Dimitrov and Donald Trump's emissaries, all real estate guys, business people. And we saw a little bit of a dark picture for us, which was the arrival of Larry Fink. Over the video screen at the meetings in Miami. But here's what I'm seeing. Do we have, and it won't be as warm as in the past, the possible beginnings of a U.S.-Russian entente to try to call City of London and all these goofies in Brussels and Berlin back into order? Is there can we see a developing, even though the U.S. media and the neocons are against it? It seems to me that there is an effort in Trump's wish to create a more Western Hemisphere policy for the United States that Trump is happy to partner with
Yeah,
Russia. When I say Trump, I mean the people behind him.
I think that's been clear for a long time, and I think that Larry Fink doesn't disturb me quite as much because I simply take it as a sign that he wants to be Timoshenko and not Gozinski. So if
Well,
you know
let's
what I
put it
mean.
like this: the fact that Larry Fink is in there, though, that there's a positive.
Yeah,
That Larry Fink showed up and is sitting there with the Russian representative
yep.
means that there is some seriousness to these talks.
Like I
That the
said,
big boys are somehow.
he'd rather be Timoshenko than Gozinski.
Mm.
Think about that.
Well, I always prefer to beat Timoshenko. Yeah, she's very smart.
Yeah.
Pretty
So
ruthless.
yeah, well, but also just in terms of what happened to them. So look at how Putin handled the oligarchs, and look at who came out of that, or at least you know,
Some
you
did
know
okay, and some got put in their place.
that's
Unfortunately,
right.
one of the nemesis you have in the Jewish world was Kordakowski. Well, before he did anything to Kordakowski, who
Yep,
should have been happy that he was able to rob the country blind and become billions. And now I want to be democracy, democracy. Well, stay in Switzerland and don't come to Russia. But
yep,
Putin said, "Look, you guys have bankrupted this country,
yep,
but I need you to run your businesses. Stay out of politics. This is Russia." And
Yep.
Kordakowski thought that the Great Beltway would help him, the same way that Poland was convinced that England would somehow help Poland not having to give Danzig back to Germany, which they had to do. And so, of course, now the whole history gets turned on its head that this brave Poland that had just been gifted a bunch of territory from Germany to get rid of the Czech Republic or Czechia or Czechoslovakia no longer existed. So when history is written, it becomes cartoonish.
yep.
In this particular case, Putin laid down the law. Now, my question to you is this:
Well,
Notice that notice
the,
that Lavrov is getting much older. Notice that they're dispatching Dimitrov, who's a financial guy, to Miami every couple of weeks, where they're meeting all over the place. Why did they pick Dimitrov and not Sergei Lavrov? That's an interesting question.
it is, and I don't know enough about the Russian internal. I don't know enough about the players to really have an opinion on that.
Yeah.
Dimitrov was in Washington last month. He was in Miami last week. So they have designated him. Now, remember, he worked in New York for a long time, big financial institutions.
Maybe they're prepping him
So,
to replace Lavrov. Lavrov's getting up there in age.
yeah. And even though Lavrov speaks good English, I mean, Dimitrov is much more. Well, okay, Dimitrov is American centric. There's no question.
Yeah.
Are these meetings between Dimitrov and the Trump people, or Russia and the Trump people, basically a repudiation of British Brussels policy more than anything else?
Mm. Yeah, pretty much. That's what that I'm seeing is that as we started off talking about the Crimean War, Russia is naturally the ally of the United States because they're both anti-British, and now because of a lot of tricksy British things that happened during the turn of the 20th century, America was taken away from that alliance, natural alliance, and was brought under control of the City of London, for a better way of describing it. And they have tremendous use of psyops to convince, especially the post-war World War II religion, cult as I call it. We're now having people moving away from that. Like one of these people who keeps pointing out about the Nick Fuentes situation is that these guys are just, the Zoomers have no connection to World War II anymore.
No.
It's 84 years ago.
No, they have no connection to anything. I mean, well, let me ask you this question, though. Remember, there is an ominous side to what happened with that period of Crimea War I leading up to the U.S. Civil War, where Russia was intricately involved. And this is the part that a lot of pro-Russian people that we know are not going to accept. Russia inevitably is going to lose some territory somewhere if we want to parallel the Crimean War. Now, here's what's interesting. Russia actually doesn't mind trading land for other benefits at times.
Of course
We've seen
not.
that
Russia has too much
in
land.
Western history.
People, this is
So
the hilarious thing that most Westerners just can't seem to understand, no matter how obvious it is that Russia has too much land and not enough people.
Yeah.
exactly, and they're all focused in there. Most of them are all in one area. So the other thing you see, and if you go back, for example, to the famous movie to Alexander Nevsky in 1938, music by Prokofiev, and it was done by Eisenstein. And this was the threat that Stalin was doing, that the German war, the Teutonic War, is coming. But at the beginning, the idea is that they have these Mongolians stepping on everybody's, that's how they personal footsteps. And so one of the things that China is concerned about is that China would love to swallow up some Russian land north of Vladivostok. And so having the United States get involved could provide better mediation. So Russia has a clear interest in having good relations with the Americans, because even though they say, and this is what all these people say, whether it's Giuliano or the other guys that are over there in China, well, the Russian-Chinese bond is unbreakable. Well, how many times in history did the Russian Mongolian and Russian Sino bonds become very, very breakable and very ugly?
I
You're
love
trying
that.
to go.
I love that kind of talk. Show me a single bond throughout all of history that's been unbreakable.
Yeah, and the impenetrable Maginot Line. So I will end this on saying that we just covered various subjects today without too much detail. You can, I guess you showed up a little late, but we'll do one in a week or two, and we'll continue. There should be a lot of interesting news going on. I'll comment more, of course, in the Middle East, and we'll both see. But you actually see the end of Ukraine coming. I wish that was the case. My last question to both of the panel is, with Brussels finally saying no to the other Brussels, to the EU Brussels, we are not going to steal Russia's assets, has that significantly hurt the European Union? Forgetting about the fact that they gave a loan, they did this. Is that significant?
I think in the larger picture, it doesn't really matter well, the only thing that changes, it helps the European Union, because the money itself is a drop in the bucket. But by refusing to turn it over, they prevented international humiliation in the courts. So, it's a net benefit that they put their foot down to the European Union, because having gone through with it would have resulted more surely in the destruction of the EU than anything else.
So for how much longer are we stuck with this monstrosity?
Well, this is a good question. And so the biggest question in my mind, and this is where I was going earlier about, west of the Don, is obviously the best thing for Russia would be for Poland to provide a peacekeeping force in Western Ukraine. And what
isn't that already being proposed?
Well, this is the strange thing. The strange thing is Poland keeps stepping back, and then the EU keeps, trying to say, "Oh, there'll be French peacekeepers, there'll be British peacekeepers, there'll be German."
As long as you have Donald Tusk and Sikorsky in there, you're going to have that problem. But remember, the number one backer for Poland is the United States. And the United States also is very, very heavily has decided that in its circle of influencers, Viktor Orban is very much there. And you do have this nationalist movement in Poland that is sick and tired of Ukraine.
Oh yeah,
and they don't even want the Ukrainians there.
I was doing a video earlier this week about the fact that you have two far right parties polling at 20% between the two of them. Plus the
1%. Oh.
There's some sort of a monarchist party that has 10%, and then there was another far right party who disagrees with them that's polling at 10%. Then
what about the Polish nationalist parties? Not anti-Russian, but Polish nationalist parties.
Yeah, those are those two are very pro anti-Ukrainian, anti-Jewish, whereas those PIS was doing at 32.
Oh, Braun, whatever is.
Yeah, Braun.
But
That
what
guy,
about
that was my first encounter with him. I'm like, ooh, wow, okay.
Yeah, he's funny. What about anti-EU? What percentage of the Polish politique is saying
That's
enough
about
with this
56%.
EU?
Anti-EU parties are at 56%. It's only
Well, but somehow Donald Tusk is holding on.
Oh yeah, well because he has the last electoral mandate, which gave a plurality to his part. No, not a plurality to his party, but he was able to cobble together a coalition with the left-wing parties, who are now polling at less than 5%.
Plus, nobody wants to be AfD'd.
Yeah.
Well, but remember one thing though: Poland, unlike the rest of Europe, is actually making some babies, and most young people tend to be pro-EU.
No, it's starting to change. Most of I did this recovery. I covered on Redacted, so I gave my reaction, and that's where I came up with the polling. Most of the pro-EU is not the young people; it's the older Boomer and Gen Xers who still watch TV. Everyone who gets their information from the internet is going decidedly against the EU now. The Zoomer and millennial
What is going on? What is going on with Redacted, and especially with Anya Kay and all these people? They've become so anti-Semitic that they've crossed even reasonable lines into wild conspiracy stuff. What Andrew Korbko told me was that a lot of these people, and to their credit, the Duran has refused to do this, is that they're pandering to those that pay their bills, to their
Judge Knapp is pretty terrible at that.
He's the worst of all. He is, of all of them, nobody is as bad as he is.
Yeah.
Not even the guy in Brazil, not even Nima at Dialogue Works. Even he doesn't come close. Judge Knapp, who used to be very good, used to be a great constitutional lawyer, has on great people. I always enjoy listening to Alistair Crook, but I can't listen to it. He's just rough. But the only person that really even goes beyond Judge Knapp would be Anya Kay and maybe Emil Kozma, but at least Emil is funny. There's nothing funny about Anya Kay. All she's doing is those people, that group of people, and these people take themselves seriously. I don't know where they're getting this stuff from, but I would have expected certainly more from Clayton Morris than to be going down that path. Don't you think that Clayton Morris should hold himself up to a higher standard, or all these people are just need to make a living? What?
He's much more into aliens these days. He doesn't really cover the Israeli stuff that much.
Well, it's been terrible. His covering of anything Jewish has been bad. But I suspect, again, once you're making your living, not from advertising the way the traditional networks do, but from your own subscribers, well, if you're relying on a check at the end of the month, you're going to paint a picture, which is what your subscribers want to hear. So once you do that, you're not much better than the networks, are you?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah. We're just in silence here.
No, it's not something I have a strong opinion on.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is that, for me, it is it is what's happened from what I can tell from the American perspective is that you had people like Charlie Kirk and other people go out there and there has been a very heavy Christian revival in the United States. And because of that revival, people started reading the Bible again. And when you read the Bible, you find out especially all these Christian Zionist preachers who are basically saying, Israel's a special place. The Jews are holy. We should worship them. And you read the Bible and you're like, that's not what this book says. There's nothing in here about.
Well, I don't even know if it goes that far, but I think it's kind of funny that we pushed, and also in Brazil, Christian Zionism so much And all of a sudden it backfired with the younger generation, and
Yep.
the spark that led to it, I was never that impressed by Charlie Kirk. Most people are. But what led to it
Mm.
was not even MAGA, was the skillful use of Hamas, basically, and this is why Sami Hamdi got thrown out of the U.S., was they found this wedge of, as you just said, contrary thought in substitution theology and in the Christian world, which had already permeated the Episcopalians, the Lutherans, and all of a sudden, America first. Well, these young people can't buy a house.
Yep.
Charlie Kirk understands that. And this is the genius of Hamas. This is where Hamas won, and their supporters and the academia. No, it's not Qatar with a bunch of guys putting money out. It's the academians in the United States
Mm.
and Hamas with the brown child and the downtrodden. And it doesn't matter whether they're real photos or fake photos, whether they're all the same. They're very well. There's a time when you want to use AI photos, believe it or not.
Mhm.
You want to use AI photos that are not real because they're effective at times.
Yeah.
But what really killed it was the America First idea, is that all this huge amount of money that all these people preaching are giving, which are not giving that much, but it looks like they're giving way, way, way too much.
Yeah.
And you guys can't go buy a house, and you're a Christian. So what did Tucker Carlson do? This is where the Israeli propaganda failed, and they failed with a thug. He brought in this guy, Munathir Isaac from Bethlehem, who is working for the PA, and he's not going to say anything good about Israel whatsoever. He's going to say, we've lost all our Christians. Well, yeah, you've lost all your Christians. You only have 2% in Bethlehem. You used to be 60%. But guess where you've picked up all the Christians? In Nazareth. Nazareth now has over 200,000, which is more than Bethlehem ever had. So do you think that somebody from the Phyllis Foundation would have reached out to Tucker Carlson?
Mhm.
No. Instead, they call him names.
Yeah.
Would he have had somebody from the Phyllis Foundation on? I don't know, but I think Tucker Carlson realizes, even if he's getting paid by Omar, by this banker, this investment banker, Omar, or whatever his name is, and he's taking a pro-Arab perspective, which is okay, just to look like he's balanced. If they reached out to him, he would probably have put on somebody from Phyllis. And I don't think that his backers would have said no, because I think to be effective, you need to try to show some balance. And I just think that they have dismissed Tucker Carlson. They've dismissed even Glenn Greenwald from being challenged to put on some people from the other side.
Yep.
And I'm not going to sit there and blame, but Turning Point was already turning before what happened in Utah. I could see it clearly that it was turning.
Yeah. Because, like, look,
And
I'm not an Anglican, but pretty close. And I remember being at my sister's funeral, and I had a friend there who was supporting me, and he was Jewish. And I was looking through the Book of Common Prayer, and I found the Daily Collect on how we're supposed to encourage all the Jews to convert to Christianity. And I showed it to him, and he said, well, at least they're polite about it. We both laughed over it. But that's the point of, like, Jews are not supposed to be special in Christianity. We're supposed to convert you all, right? That's what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed. And I find the Christian Zionists heretical and also enemies of Israel, because what they want is to get all the Jews into Israel so they can have the second coming of Christ and end the world. That's just crazy to me. That's
I
their
got to be honest with you. I never ever bought into the idea. I'm not denying that there were a few people that thought that way, but I never bought into the idea that this is a really popular or prevalent thread throughout American society. I always
Christian Zionism.
Yeah,
Christian Zionism is not that it's so big, but it's extremely powerful among certain very wealthy groups.
Yeah.
Bill Agee, Huckabee, like these guys. And, they do create an important constituency. I'll tell you who else is extremely Christian Zionist: Brazilians and Koreans. So, again, are they the majority? Of course not. Let's not kid ourselves, all right?
There's a lot of wacky ideas that are extremely powerful in small niche communities of wealthy people.
But you have to, Wasserman, you have to understand, for Americans, Christian Zionism and it came into the evangelical movement in the 80s, and they made this alliance. They got Reagan on board. And when you're watching the Christian revival movement happening in the United States, and they're all these people are listening to their pastors talking about how great Israel is. And they're like, but that's not what the Bible says. I'm reading your book. Like,
let me ask you a question.
Well, no, it's not just that. It's not just that.
Let me ask you a question.
Mhm.
How long has, I'm leading somewhere with this, of course. So the question is, how long would you say that there's been significant deep pockets of communism, of modern day communist, hardcore communists in the U.S. government?
in the government or in the populace?
In the government.
Not very much anymore.
No. How? So you think it's reducing?
Yeah, I think the actual communist thought probably hit its peak in the 40s and really got purged out.
That's interesting. So you don't think that
like neoconservatism is Trotsky is, but I don't really.
So you don't think that people like Bass and Newsom are communists?
No, they're grifters. I don't really think they're not in the way the Blairites used to be. Maoists.
Well. Listen, I mean, communism is always led by a grifter, always.
Yeah,
Of course. I mean, well written, but this is the way I look at Christian Zionism. I think that in the States, it's going to continue, but it's going to stay mainly in Texas and some of the Carolinas. It's going to recede. There's no question.
Sitting U.S. senator in an interview say his number one goal is not to the people of Texas, but a foreign country.
Yeah, I mean that's really that is just being a little bit too crude, and unfortunately, he's hurting the movement. Where I think, of course, I'm biased. Where I think you're going to see the next wave of what we might call Christian Zionism, which is already there, are the evangelicals that believe in Israel and Brazil. Brazil is much more organic, and I'll tell you why. Christian Zionism in the United States are relatively wealthy people. Christian Zionism in Brazil are much more poor people.
Yeah, I know. I was watching a documentary on that a few
weeks
ago.
Let me try and finish my thought.
Mm-hmm.
So then, what do you call the part of the U.S. government that has taken over California and New York? What words do you use for those people?
I think that's a generational thing. I don't think it's at all about communism. I'm not even sure it's about Bolshevism.
No, just give me so they're Bolsheviks. I accept that.
Are they Bolsheviks or are they Trotskyists?
Yeah.
Are they Bolsheviks or are they Trotskyists?
Pick one. Just give me a name and I'll go with it.
I'd go with, at best, because they still believe in private property, I would go with Mensheviks, though I'm not very familiar with Mensheviks.
I would go with a cross between Menshevik and Trotskyist.
Yeah, that would be probably
okay. All right. So how prevalent in the U.S. government, and for how long do you think that's been growing?
I don't think it's going to grow that much, but I think Mandami was put there for a reason in New York. And I think Mandani was put there because the real powers need to keep the Democratic Party in New York. And if they could not have him in there, that could be the end of the Democratic Party. Things are so expensive in New York and so ridiculous, they had to do something.
When Nancy Pelosi gets to be House Minority Leader, that's kind of where I trace most of the starting.
Okay. So how long ago was that? I can't remember. 20 years ago?
It was, I think after 2004.
Right. Okay, and so that group of people, whatever you call them, there's a couple of things they hate more than anything. Off the top of your head, what are those things?
Well, disloyalty. They're all about keeping the group together.
True. Yeah. Okay. They hate disloyalty. How do they feel about Christians?
Oh yeah, they
don't like them at all.
No.
Yeah. So earlier I told you that I've taken all this stuff about Christian Zionists with a grain of salt for a very long time?
Mhm.
That's why.
So you think this group helped to create Christian Zionism to repress Christian revival? Is that your argument?
I believe that they. I don't know for sure because that's pretty conspiratorial. All I'll say is that we have a group of people who've been in power in the U.S. government for a long time who have a vested interest in continuously manufacturing anti-Christian propaganda.
Yeah.
You have another aspect going on, and talking about Candace Owens, who used to be very pro-Israel. Now, I, as a classical musician, am vehemently opposed to Vatican II. It's against every cultural thing that I would ever stand for. On the other hand, most Jewish people in the world would say Vatican II was essential because it eliminated the Good Friday trope about the perfidious Jews. Well, I think Vatican II has gone way too far, and people want to get back to some tradition now. Well, not really, because in Latin America, I mean, this idea of funk masses and pop masses and rock masses and God knows what else type of masses, the worst type of vernacular. I couldn't think of anything worse.
Yeah, I went to one of those churches once. That was a creepy experience.
Yeah, so, I mean, basically, to bring, if you look at the biggest resistance that you see, even with this Pope, the new Pope, who I thought he would be much, much better than Bergoglio. He did his first mass, believe it or not, he spoke Latin.
Mhm.
But he's falling right back into the Bergoglio thing, and he's still not championing Latin whatsoever. So, as a to the mem shows, I mean, change comes glacially. There is a bigger backlash against Vatican II, but it's not big enough to really make any difference. What's your thought, Wasserman?
That's a good question. I would say this. I would say that mainstream, or not mainstream, I will say traditional old guard Christianity is pretty much decisively merged with whatever you want to call the thread of, you said some mix of Menshevism and Bolshevism or Trotskyism. I would say that the mainstream Christian institutions are pretty much taken over by that. However, I differentiate between that and the mainstream Christian people, the mainstream Christian beliefs. And the mainstream Christian people decisively were clustering around Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk created...
Well, no. The young people, mainstream
Young people.
Zoomers.
Yeah.
Okay, Zoomers. Fair enough. Well, let me put it this way: the vital Christian movement, the actual Christian movement of the U.S. Is clustered around that kind of Christianity, which is very practical.
But that Christianity, and I'm speaking out of my area of knowledge, so I apologize for speaking out of what I'm qualified to speak about. I think it's endemically, it needs to be, at the end of the day, somewhat anti-Israel. That's my feeling. It's
no,
not.
I honestly don't think so. I mean, you have guys like me and David Freiheit. And with all respect to you and how you feel, I've never liked Israel. I don't like Israel because I don't like the Middle East. I don't like any. And I
No. I understand that, but I'm saying that you had this movement of Christian Zionism, okay, that was all tied to Israel, and all this people that are all trying to say shalom and all. Okay, that's fine, but overall, the revivalism that's being done.
Let me say, so this revivalism, I don't think that they're anti-Jewish. Let me say that.
Yeah,
I really don't.
They're anti the state of Israel,
and so
I think Israel will get new friends.
Well, no, but you try to tell the average Jew that. For the average Jew, if you're anti-Israel, you're anti-Jew.
Fair enough.
And the problem with that, now let me take that one step further, though, because this is where you and I might have an agreement. If I was a Catholic, and obviously I'm not, I would be interested in one thing, and that's bringing back the Latin. and that's anti-Vatican II. So, basically what I think what Christian revivalism is doing is it's taking a more traditional Christianity and bringing it back in a modern form, which for me, it's not my thing, but okay, fine. And to do that, being surrounded by Israel is not their priority, and all they had to do, and Charlie Kirk caught on to this.
Mhm.
This is where Israel dropped, dropped the ball. Is that MAGA and America First is a financial movement, and so when you hear all these senators, as
Yes. Okay.
David said,
Agreed.
you
We
know,
agree. The quote unquote anti whatever you want sentiment that's popular amongst people with whom Charlie Kirk was popular is exactly parallel to the anti-Ukrainian movement. Nobody hates the Ukrainians. We just don't want to send all our money there.
Well, I can't say for that sure about that.
well, first of all, there is something weird in the Jewish world that so many Jews are willing to support the Banderovsky because they've been brainwashed into saying Russia bad, Russia bad, Russia
Exactly what
bad.
I'm
So
saying.
I
This is my point. My point is that your average Charlie Kirkus, let's call it that, your average Charlie Kirkus looks at the situation and sees a direct parallel to the Ukraine. There is some kind of
interesting that you're bringing that up. No, that is interesting. No, but what about? But doesn't Ukraine still have a lot of support among young people?
No.
everyone sees that there's a gigantic conspiracy, the point of which is probably to empty the U.S. Treasury.
Yeah.
And
I don't live in the U.S., so I'm not privy to that.
exactly
To that, it's interesting.
Yeah.
And they see
So
Israel.
basically, it's really what you're saying is, the more I think about this. Before we had this podcast, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a supporter of the Palestinian Authority, and we were talking about propaganda and Hasbara. And I think that is where we underestimated completely, not just Hamas, but the academia, whether it's the Muslim Brotherhood or whatever, this network of organizations that were at least smart enough to listen to young people and understand that America First means I need to buy a house for me and my wife and have a kid. And no, nobody wants to have a kid. We're past the generation of half a generation ago where nobody wanted to have kids. I think part of Christian revival is because the younger people now want to have kids, and you cannot do it when your house is started $500,000 and $600,000.
It's a form
and you're
of
22 years old.
It's a form of meaning making which is available to. It's a completely democratic form of meaning making.
Repeat that, please.
It is a completely democratic form of meaning making, status and meaning, the two fundamental human drives.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I think we need to have more conversations on this subject. The problem is that what I have found on social media, which is why I'm not participating much in it right now, except putting out articles or stuff for what I believe, is that tribalism is so great that it's difficult to confront real issues. And certainly, I see it in the Jewish world, and one of the reasons I've become so strident on Netanyahu needing to become a senior statesman and step down from this is not even his what I consider to be absolute abominable behavior towards Syria. It's not even abominable towards Syria; it's abominable towards Israel not taking advantage of an opportunity. But even worse than that, basically, all this stupid quips he's made about $7,000 an ad for an influencer, or we're going to, outlaw TikTok, or we're going to have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs fight back with real propaganda. No, you don't fight back with real propaganda. You don't mention propaganda at all. You have to go and address those young people and say, no, we don't want to take your money. No, we don't. We want to align with you. And so if you want to see the best critique of Israel's failings in dealing with that very generation that we're talking about, I suggest watching the interview of Colin Tomlinson that Amichai Chikri brought to Israel. He spent 2 weeks in Israel. talking to Knesset members, talking to his generation. Israel has a tremendous pull for these very young people in Europe because it is a homogeneous society.
Mm.
It is a making babies at a rate of 2.8, 2.9, and it is producing babies, and the system works, and it's this homogeneous society that every single younger movement, nationalist movement in Europe, and I would suspect in the United States wants. But for some reason, the elites in the Jewish world are from my generation.
Mm.
They cannot come to grips with that. And so Colin Tomlinson says, well, why did Israel lose Europe? Lose the young people in Europe? And he's been expounding on that, and it's the best film that I've seen. So maybe we can expound on that some other time. So, like when you're telling me, Watchman, you don't like the Middle East, or he's telling me, well, traditionally it's not, then once you recognize that, what you need to be able to say is, this strategy worked for a while, now we need a new strategy, but not to double down on the old strategy.
Yep.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, I hope I didn't dominate too much. We have a bunch of talking points. So I'd like to prepare the next one, and I'll look at a couple of podcasts that I was telling you about, and I'd like to even this small podcast we had today. At least it's not the same thing regurgitating and regurgitating and regurgitating again. So
yeah, that's what I want to
which
do.
I think
I do.
Although I have to tell you, I still respect the Duran. I still think the Duran does a good job. And what's your so that's okay, guys. We'll do something next week. So be well. Thanks for having this today.
Well, no, not next week. Well, are we going to try for Friday?
Look, I don't have any family here in Argentina. I can do whatever I want to do.
Friday's good for Michael. Friday's good for me.
I'll be in Ottawa, but I can do something from my laptop or my phone. So yeah,
okay.
That's
and let's see if we can get money. But here's what we do. Let's confirm Thursday night before, because I will wake up early, especially for money if he can commit to making it. Otherwise, I want to do it at this time.
Yeah. Okay.
I have some other ideas that I'll talk about offline. But okay, guys, thank you very much, and have a good day.
I'll be cracking on that essay for you.
Yep.
All right. Okay. Bye, everyone.